uh, how do we measure development, and what are the certain aspects that we need to keep in mind when we talk about development in the definitional sense and when we talk about development in the measurement sense. And we discovered that defining development is a holistic perspective. We define development with a holistic perspective where we take into consideration different aspects of a certain economy. But when we talk about measuring development, then we restrict ourselves to measuring it through GDP levels, per capita GNP levels, because it is believed that GNP is actually highly correlated with other factors of development. And so we talked about different dimensions to how we should consider bringing these larger set of variables, how we should restrict them to a smaller set, and how as of now it's only GNP per capita, which sounds like a fair measuring indicator that could possibly also get correlated with other aspects of development. So we'll just quickly watch this video here, which nicely summarizes the view that we have.
Is real GDP per capita a good measure of the standard of living? People tell me all the time, you economists, you're too materialistic. Doesn't real GDP per capita just measure the things we buy? What about our health, our happiness, education? Well, real GDP per capita, it's not a perfect measure, but I want to show you why it's probably the best single measure of the average standard of living in a country. And that's not because material goods are the most important goods. It's because real GDP per capita is correlated with many of the other things that we care about. Let's start with life expectancy. Here we show real GDP per capita along the horizontal axis and life expectancy along the vertical axis. As you can see, there's a positive correlation. Countries that have a higher GDP per capita also have a higher life expectancy. Perhaps that's not too surprising. Let's take a look at happiness. Maybe this is a more surprising fact. This chart shows GDP per capita on the horizontal axis, and now a measure of happiness on the vertical axis. Again, we see a positive correlation. Countries with a higher real GDP per capita also tend to have happier people, on average. Here's a data set from the United Nations. It's called the Human Development Index. It combines measures of life expectancy, education, and standard of living. Overall, you can see, in general, as GDP per capita increases, so does human development, at least as measured by this index. The basic story, it's pretty simple. When we have more goods and services, we can usually afford more of the other good things in life. So the good things in life, they tend to go together. However, GDP per capita is far from perfect. Here's one problem. GDP per capita misses the distribution of income. For example, let's compare the real GDP per capita of Nigeria, Pakistan, and Honduras. It's actually pretty similar. So you might think that all three countries have similar living standards. And yet in Nigeria, about 80% of the population lives on less than $2 a day. In Pakistan, it's only 60%. In Honduras, it's only 33%. How can the number of people living in abject poverty be so different when real GDP per capita is about the same? The reason is that income in Nigeria is much more unequally distributed than in Pakistan or Honduras. Nigeria has many poor people, but also some very rich people. So average income, it's about the same in Nigeria, Pakistan, or Honduras, even though there are more poor people in Nigeria. Over time, however, growth in real GDP per capita, whether in Nigeria, Pakistan, or Honduras, usually does indicate growth in everyone's incomes, including the incomes of the very poor. So this graph shows growth in per capita incomes along the horizontal axis, with growth in the incomes of the poorest 20% on the vertical axis. Once again, you see, as average per capita income increases, you also see increases in income of the very poor. Overall, real GDP and real GDP per capita have proven to be useful measures for comparing the standard of living of two different countries or for comparing the same country at different points in time. Okay, so now that you know that real GDP per capita is a good measure of the standard of living, we get to the really crucial question. How do we increase the standard of living? How do we grow an economy? How do we increase real GDP per capita? That is a big question, the big question of development.
So I hope the video sort of summarizes the discussion we had in the previous class, where we talked about how GDP serves as a good proxy indicator for development, and the text that we are doing right now also discusses how inequality is important to look at, how the distribution of GDP, how the distribution of income is an important aspect to look at, which is the point of discussion in today's class. So let's resume to our text here. We also talked about how measuring GDP, measuring development through income levels could have measurement issues, and we talked about different measurement issues. We talked about the ICP program, the PPP, the purchasing power parity concept. Today what we are going to talk about is primarily about how this income is distributed, what are the historical experiences worldwide that we have witnessed, and how in the world economy the level of GDP is distributed, and how that makes a difference to the story of development. Okay, so we are talking about the time of 1960-85. The richest 5% of the world's nations averaged a per capita income that was about 29 times the corresponding figure for the poorest 5%. So if we try, so the richest 5%, if you compare during 1960-85, if you compared the richest 5% of the world's nations to the poorest 5%, you would notice that the ratio of their incomes was 29 to 1. So which means that the richest 5% had 29 times the income level of the poorest 5%, which is a huge number. And that sort of gives us an indication of the kind of inequality that we had in the world back then. But it is even more shocking and surprising to know that even right now in the present scenario, we don't see much of a difference in terms of this number. And although there could be changes that have happened within the world nations, so maybe there are certain countries which have grown from that time period to the existing time period, and then there will also be some countries which have fallen from their position if you try and compare this time period and the present time period. But what you will notice is that the fact that the richest 5% countries bear approximately the same ratio of incomes relative to the poorest 5% nations is slightly that slightly needs our concern, because we see that the distribution has remained almost stagnant. Having said that, it is true that there are certain countries which might have grown, and so such as these East Asian economies that have shown immense growth over this time period. But if you try and plot these countries on a graph, you will see that the distribution has remained fairly constant. So as I said, that there will be some countries which have become examples of growth miracles, whereas there would be some countries which have become examples of growth disasters. So Latin America and Sub-Saharan Africa are such examples which were actually growing at relatively high rates of economic growth before 1980s. So before, the 2 decades before 1980s were relatively better for these geographic areas, but after 1980s, there was no growth at all in these economies, and some studies also observe that in Latin America, per capita income fell by 11% during the 1980s, and only Chile and Colombia had a higher per capita income in 1990 than they did in 1980. So during 1980, if you compare 1980s and 1990s, then there was a major drop for a lot of economies in Latin America, and it's only these two economies which actually had a higher income, higher per capita income in 1990 as compared to 1980s. Whereas this was the same time when you would, if you would have read this in Indian economy, you would know that this is the same time when the Chinese economy and even in fact, the Indian economy started growing, because these were the phases when certain state policies were changing in these economies, and that sort of led to more economic expansion in these economies. So definitely there were some economies which sort of growed, in which expanded during this time, whereas there were some other economies which shrinked during this time, and that sort of made the entire distribution of the world's nations stationary or stagnant. Even Africa stagnated or declined during the 1980s. Countries such as Nigeria and Tanzania experienced substantial declines of per capita income. Um, so these diverse growth experiences can change the face of the world in a couple of decades. One easy way to check this is to look at the doubling time, which basically tells you how long would it take for any economy to double the level of income that they are earning today. So if you compare that, and how do you actually do that? You basically divide the growth rate, current annual growth rate of any income with 70. And why do you do that? You can refer to the footnote here. It's very simple to understand. So you basically divide 70 with the current growth rate, and whatever number you get, it tells you the number of years that you would require for any economy to double the level of income that they are earning today. So suppose there's certain economy earning X level of income today, then how long would it take for this economy to become 2x is what this ratio will tell you. So that's called as the doubling time, which is number of years it takes for income to double if it is growing at some given rate. So assuming that it grows at the same rate, how long would it take for any economy to double the level of income that it's earning right now? So any economy growing at 5% per year will double its per capita income every 14 years. So you just simply divide 70 with 5, and the answer tells you the number of years that you will require to double the level of income. In contrast, a country growing at 1% per year will require 70 years. So, and why do you do that is mentioned here in the footnotes. You can refer to this of why we use this ratio. So this is one way of checking how the economies. I mean, this is a very basic method. I mean, definitely you need more complex statistics to forecast how certain economies will grow in the next couple of decades. But this is just one approximation that you can use. That given the current rate of growth for certain countries, you can forecast how long would it take how long would it take for these economies to become double the size of what they are in terms of income if they grow at the same rate. So that will sort of give you a picture of how these economies will turn out to be. But definitely this is not the best way of understanding or forecasting the growth trajectories for different nations. Again, the diverse experiences of countries such as growth miracles, which have experienced growth miracles or growth disasters, they definitely demand an explanation. And not just economies which have experienced miracles or disasters, also economies which have maintained a stable rate of stable standard of living also needs explanation, because that is what an ideal economy would want to achieve. And it's important to understand the reasons behind such trajectories. And but again, I mean, it's very difficult to dissect this down to one single explanation. There are different reasons, subject to different conditions, and every economy has their own idiosyncrasies, and it's difficult to sort of narrow this down to one set of explanation. So in Latin America, the so-called debt crisis was possibly the reason which triggered economic hardship in that geographical area. Sub-Saharan Africa, maybe because of unstable government and consequent infrastructural breakdown. So the reasons for both disasters could also be starkly different in different countries, and so the reasons for growth miracles could be different in different countries. So but definitely we would want to understand or get an idea of what's happening in these economies and what has led to success or downfall of these economies over a period of time. All right, so going ahead with that background, let's look at this graph first. Yeah, so to summarize the previous page, it is quite possible for the world distribution of income to stay fairly constant in relative terms, meaning that the poorest, if you compare the poorest and the richest nations, then it is possible that it stays constant. But which country is becoming the poorest country, or which country is moving on the ladder and becoming the richest country, could change. So at the same time, there's plenty of action within that distribution as countries climb and descend the ladder of relative economic achievement. And that is what you will see in this figure as well, which is showing you so the x-axis tells you the annual percentage change in income relative to US, and the number of countries, this is the frequency. So you will notice that during this period 1960 to 85, these numbers here, -5, -5 to -4, this is less than -5, -4 to -3. It tells you that relative to the US economy, these countries have their income has fallen, and by how much amount is by how much percentage is given to you here in terms of these numbers. So minus negative sign tells you that the income has decreased, and the positive sign tells you that the income has increased. So during this period, 1960 to 85, these were the countries. So 21 countries had a 1% increase from 1960 to 1985, and 13 countries had 1% fall. 8 countries had an increase from 1 to 2%, and 15, no, this is 16 countries had a fall from 1 to 2%. So you will notice broadly the distribution to the left of this, distribution to the left of this, and distribution to the right of this fairly looks the same. So what essentially the author is trying to focus on is that the number of, not number, but the percentage of countries which would have increased, which would have seen growth increase, is fairly broadly equal to the number of countries which would have fallen over this time period. So the entire distribution looks more or less constant, but definitely there are a lot of changes occurring within this distribution, which has to be focused on and which has to be understood, and the reasons behind such changes have to be discovered or identified. And to do that, for sort of put more focus on how these countries are moving up or moving down the ladder in terms of income, there is something called as the mobility matrix that we'll move on to. But before we do that, these 2 points here are important from this chart, which is that the figure indicates, firstly, a significant fraction of countries change their position relative to US by an average of 1 percentage point or more per year over this period. The figure also indicates that there's a rough kind of symmetry between changes upwards and changes downwards, which partly accounts for the fact that you don't see much movement in the world distribution taken as a whole. Now, this observation needs some more dissection. So, we are saying that the world distribution fairly stays the same over this 25-year time period, and this observation is cause for much hope and some fear. So, hope, why? Because it tells us that there are probably no traps to ultimate economic success, meaning that any economy which is poverty stricken today is not bound to stay in that trap forever. So this chart tells us that there will be economies which will move out of poverty and which will move out of economic distress one or the other day, because you see that there has been changes in there has been a lot of changes in economies which were poor in 1960, and in 1985 they were on a completely different platform. Whereas it also tells you, it is also a cause of fear. This chart is also a cause of fear because it seems that it is all too easy to slip and fall in the process. So it's also possible, it's not just possible that you might increase in terms of per capita income probably in a span of 20 years, but it's also possible that you might fall to a level that you wouldn't have, your history wouldn't have ever imagined. So this chart tells you that although there are fair share of economies increasing, but there are also fair share of economies which are decreasing. So this chart is basically a cause of both hope and fear at the same time. Again, as I said that although there appears to be no evidence that very poor countries are doomed to eternal poverty, there is some indication that low incomes are very sticky. Which is true that low incomes are sticky, but at the same time there is no mandate that these will always be poor, these will stay poor forever. There's also something called as ultimate convergence of countries, which I'm sure you would have read in some of the growth models that you would have covered in macro, and we will be discussing these models again in this course as well, where we say, so the Solow model basically predicts that the rate of growth of poorer economies will be much greater than the rate of growth of richer economies, and ultimately in the long run the growth rates of all of these economies will converge. So the reason why low incomes may not create a tap is also some hope also comes from the theory of Solow, where he talks about ultimate convergence, where he says that every economy will tend to move to a common rate of growth in the long run. And so as I said that another way of understanding the changing dynamics of countries in the world scenario is through this concept of mobility matrix. And to understand how this works, what exactly we are doing here, so let's just first look at how this looks. So this is how the matrix looks here. In this box you will see some fractions here, so you see some numbers here in the column as well as in the row, as well as you have multiple columns here and multiple rows with the same fractions. So you will notice 1 by 4, 1 by 4, 1 by 2, 1 by 2. So this basically represents the two time periods. So we are talking about 1962-85, but I think here they have restricted it to, yeah, so it's mentioned here, it's 1962 to 84. So this is 1962 and this is 1984, and these fractions are basically ratios of income. And what ratio of income is explained here. So we have converted all per capita incomes to fraction of world's per capita income. So suppose a country X has a per capita income of 1000 and the world average is 2000 in these two particular time periods. So we have done this separately for 1962 and separately for 1984. So in 1962, if a country has an average income of 1000 and the world average is 2000, then we give this country an index of 1 by 2. So you divide the per capita income of the country with the per capita income of the world, and the ratio that you get for these countries is what is written here. So a category with label 2 contains all countries with indexes between 1 and 2. The category 1 by 4 contains all countries with indexes less than 1 by 4. So this is more like a less than cumulative frequency sort of table, where you are saying that 1 by 4 represents the number of countries who have indexes from 0 to 1 by 4. Every country below 1 by 4. Then 1 by 2 represents the set of countries between 1 by 4 and 1 by 2, and so on. Infinity represents the set of countries which will have the indexes more than 2. So 1 by 4 below 1 represents that the country's per capita income is less than the world per capita world average. 1 by 4 represents that the country's per capita income is 1 by 4th times, which is less than the world average income. 1 by 2 will also represent the same, that the country's income is half as that of the world's average. 1 represents that it is the same as the world average, and 2 represents that it is twice the average of the world income. And infinity definitely refers to the numbers greater than 1 basically represent that the country's income is greater than the world average, whereas numbers less than 1 represent that the country's income is less than the world average, right? And you have these numbers here. So I'll just tell you what these numbers represent. So you basically do this for two points of time, one 1962 and the other one is 1984, and you want to understand if between these two time periods countries have moved from these different indexes to other values. What has been the movement, what has been the mobility changes across these two time periods. So this number would represent, so suppose I pick this number, the numbers here in the cell would represent the number of countries. These are frequencies. जो ये अंदर बॉक्स के अंदर सेल में numbers हैं, they represent the frequencies, and this row represents the index in 1984. This column represents, the first column represents the index in 1962. How do you get the index? You divide the country's per capita income with the world's average, and the number here represents the number of countries which have moved from this index in 1962 to this index in 1984. Right? So 76 countries which had 1 by 4th the income of the world average in 1962 had the same average, had the same ratio in 1984 as well. So you see that 76 countries witnessed no mobility, no change in terms of their relative position in the world. If you compare their income to the world's income, then they have really witnessed no changes, no mobility. Their income is in the same ratio as before. Then it would be interesting to notice that countries which had 1 by 4th the income in 1962, none of these countries could have a greater income than the world average in 1984. So 12 of them actually could reach the level of world average by 1984, but none of them could move beyond the world average. So none of them had a ratio greater than 1 in 1984. Right, which sort of tells you, because countries which had 1 by 4, the countries which had this index would include all kinds of poor countries in 1962, because if so 1 by 4 doesn't really mean just 1 by 4, it basically incorporates every country which had less than 1 by 4th the share of income in the world average with respect to the world average as well. So these will be set of poor countries in 1962, and you notice that these poor countries stay poor. 76 of them still stay poor in 1984 as well. 12 of them witness some growth, So they reach 50%, they become, their index increases to 1 by 4 to 1 by 2, which means that they will now have the share of income between 1 by 4 and 1 by 2, and 12 of them between 1 by 2 and 1. And this 12 doesn't necessarily represent that all 12 of them will have the ratio 1. Any country which falls under this index means that the index would be between 1 by 2 to 1. But still, it shows some improvement from 1 by 4 to 1. But you would notice that none of them could move to 2 or more than 2. So basically, 2 would represent an absolute increase. Any country falling in this column would certainly mean that yx is greater than yw. But any country falling in this column, this relationship may not be strong. It's actually just the maximum that you can reach is that yx would be equal to yw if the ratio is exactly equal to 1, but this could be less as well, depending on what number did the country actually achieve, but definitely an increase from 1 by 4. So this is the chart that has been plotted, and it's called as the mobility matrix. Why mobility matrix? Because it tells you the mobility of countries from 1962 to 1984. Basically, we are looking at the changes in the positions of different economies over two time periods. One is 1962 and the other is 1984. So this column represents the index of each country in 1962, and this row represents the index of the countries in 1984. How are we calculating this index? So we are basically dividing the per capita income of country X with the per capita world average. So suppose a country X has $1,000 as the per capita income and the world average is 2,000, then this country will get an index 1 by 2. This is how we are calculating the index for each country in the Summers-Heston data set. And we are placing then these different countries in these different cells. So 1 by 4 here represents every country which has an index less than 1 by 4. 1 by 2 represents every country which has an index between 1 by 4 and 1 by 2. Country having an this 1 index represents countries between 1 by 2 and 1, and so on. Infinity would represent countries between 2 and more than 2 to infinity. So this exercise of placing countries in different indices is done for 2 years, 1962 and 1984. Then in these cells, so suppose this number 76 here, this would represent the number of countries who had index 1 by 4 in 1962 and 1 by 4 in 1984. Similarly, index 12 would represent countries, this cell 12 would represent countries having index 1 by 4 in 1962 and 1 by 2 in 1984. So this is how you interpret the numbers here in the cell, and indices, these indices that you have here in the rows and columns are calculated with this ratio. So any country which falls below this, basically these three columns, the first three columns would represent countries having income less than or equal to the world average. At max, they can attain the value 1 here, which will be, no, actually 1 is counted here in this column. So it's actually just less than the world average. These three columns would tell you the number of countries which have their per capita income less than the world average, whereas these two columns will tell you countries whose income are greater than the world average. So as we discussed in the last class that countries with this index in 1962, if you look at the movement of these countries in 1984, then you will notice that a major percentage of these economies, 76% of these economies were actually in the same index, they were in the same category, 1 by 4. Only 12 of them moved to a higher category and 12 of them moved to another higher category, but none of them could have a percentage, none of them could have their income greater than the world average in 1984. So you see 0 and 0 here. So if you have to interpret this mobility matrix in two extremes, one of the extreme of this matrix could be that you have very high numbers in the diagonal of this matrix. What does the diagonal represent here? The diagonal actually just note a change here, that was my error. These are not the absolute numbers or absolute frequencies, these are the percentage shares of the countries. You would notice that the entire row comes out to be 100 here, right? If I'm not wrong, that's the case. Hmm.
Yes, ma'am.
No, not all of them. Three. Yeah, so these are percentages. Okay, so yeah, so I was talking about the diagonal of this matrix. If you look at the diagonal of this matrix and if you witness that the diagonal has large numbers, then that represents very less mobility across the two time periods, because the diagonal basically will have the same index here as well as the same index in 1984. So diagonal cells would represent the same indices in the same index values in the two time periods, and if you have a large allocation in these diagonal cells, then that represents less mobility, very low mobility. Whereas suppose, so this is one of the extremes that you could have for this mobility matrix. The other extreme is that you have the same percentage share in each cell. So if it sums out to 100, then suppose each cell had 20. So instead of 76, this had 20, this had 20, this had 20, this had 20, and this as well had 20. So if each, this basically represents that regardless of where you start in 1962, you have equal probability of being in any of these categories in 1984. So this kind of a matrix where you have the same number in each cell would represent um, more mobility or a high chance of mobility. So these are the two kinds of extremes that you can think of for this mobility matrix. Now, Vishakha had raised a question that what is the meaning of this 95? So this clearly means that again 95% of the rich economies, this any economy which had infinity in 1962 would mean what? This would mean that these economies had their income, their per capita income greater than twice the world average income. So any country which had this ratio between 2 and infinity will come under this category, right? So these are all the rich economies that we are talking about in 1962, and you notice that none of them uh, saw a decline. Only 5% of these economies saw a decline and they moved from infinity to 2, but 95% of these economies stayed in the same category. So that is the meaning of 95 here, that the rich economies in 1962, 96%, oh sorry, 95% of these rich economies stayed where they were in 1984. But having said that, it doesn't mean, so you are looking at the broad changes here, but definitely there could be relative changes amongst these countries. It is possible. So as I said, that this infinity doesn't represent infinity. This infinity, countries could have value 3, some of them could have value 10, some of them could have value 20, some of them could have value 2.2. So infinity will basically include all these index values. Now, it is possible that a country Y who had an index 3 in 1962 would come under, that will come under this category. But suppose this country had index 2.5 in 1984, but this, if you look at this country individually, then you see that there has been a fall from 1962 to 1984, but it will still come under category infinity, right? So we are only talking about broad mobilities here. We are not really talking about how each country mobilized from 19, how that moved from 1962 to 1984. We are only talking about these broad categories. It is possible that a country Z who had suppose another country Z who had the same value 3 in 1962, it had value 10 in 84. So you can have different permutations, combinations to each of these cells as well. So 95 just represents that none of them fell, none of them moved to less than 2. Everybody was above 2 in 1984 as well. But we are not really talking about comparison of individual starting point and end point, right? So there could still be relative changes amongst these countries. The mobility here is just a very broad kind of mobility that we are talking about. Now let me first get rid of these numbers here. Okay, now if you look at the middle income countries here, that seems to have far greater mobility than either the poorer or the richer countries. If you look at the poorer countries, which is say this row, you will notice that there's very less mobility. None of them could move to these categories, which represent the higher level of income as compared to the world average. If you look at the rich income categories, which are these, which are economies which had index infinity in 1962, again you will notice very less mobility. 95% stayed in the same category, 5% fell to index 2. This is 1984. If you look at middle income countries now, you will notice that they seem to have greater mobility as compared to these two extremes. If you look at this value here, you will notice that you see 20% moving to lesser income. So if you start with 1 in 1962, then 26% of them moved to category 2. 20% fell below and they moved to category 1 by 2 and 1 by 4. 46% stayed there. If you look at this value, again 31% stayed in the same category, 52% fell to smaller category, to a lesser category, 10% moved to a higher category, 7% moved to an even higher category, right? Again, if you look at this, then you will notice that although 53% stayed in the same category, but 24% also moved to a higher category. So relatively, if you compare these rows which are low and rich income economies, you will notice that there is greater mobility in the middle income countries as compared to the low and rich income countries. So this definitely suggests that although everything is possible in principle, which means that it is possible for a very low income economy to grow at a very high rate in the forthcoming decades, but and it is also possible for a very high income economy to fall to the levels unimaginable by the history of that economy. It is still suggests, this kind of matrix suggests that a history of underdevelopment or extreme poverty puts countries at a tremendous disadvantage. So it definitely represents that countries which had utter poverty in 1962, a large percentage of these countries had the similar situation in 1984. Historically also, what is the status of your economy? History plays a great role in deciding how your economy will behave in the future. Having said that, we still say that everything is possible in principle, because we have seen a lot of growth miracles occurring in the world economy, which were nothing in say 1962, and they were sort of the major forerunners of development in 1990s or 1980s. So that's still possible. Because you do have certain models of economic growth where it has been proven that historically low levels of income may actually be advantageous to rapid growth. So if you remember solo model thoda sa bhi, agar if you can recall solo model, then you will know that jin countries ka capita पर इनकम कम होता था, स्मॉल के जिनका कम होता था, दे यूज टू हैव अ लार्जर रेट ऑफ ग्रोथ एज कंपेयर टू कंट्रीज विद ग्रेटर स्मॉल के. सो सोलो मॉडल ऑल्सो प्रिडिक्ट्स कि जिन कंट्रीज के पावर्टी ज़्यादा होता है, जिनका लेवल ऑफ इनकम कम होता है, दे हैव अ हायर चांस ऑफ ग्रोइंग, दे विल विटनेस अ हायर रेट ऑफ ग्रोथ एज कंपेयर टू other economies which are richer, relatively richer than these economies. And the reason being that the capital stock is relatively low as compared to labor in poor countries, so the marginal product of capital would be very high. So for these poor economies, since capital K is very small and capital K is very small, it indicates that the relative amount of capital with respect to labor is less, right? So small amount of capital and large amount of labor would represent that marginal product of capital is high. And that is the reason why we believe theoretically through these models that economies which have low levels of income will have more growth in the long run. So there are, I mean, different theories, but empirically also you see different results, and you try and make a sense of the world by comparing the theory with the empirics and understand what's whether the theory is actually leading to results. While in some cases it would have led to some results, but in other cases it hasn't. So as the author has also been focusing that it is not so simple to sort of bring the reason to one possible explanation. There could be different explanations for different experiences of different countries. Okay, so this page basically talks about the mobility matrix. I think we've already discussed mobility matrix in detail, so you can go through this page and you will understand what we've already, this is just a revision of what we have already discussed. Let's look at this page where in 3-4 points the entire discussion has been summarized. So over the period 1960 to 85, the relative distribution of the world income appears to have been quite stable. We are talking about the distribution of the world income, but definitely within this distribution there has been a lot of changes, but the relative distribution of the world income has been stable. That's the first result, first point that we can summarize from the discussion that we've had. The richest 5% of the world's nations average a level of per capita income that was 29 times the corresponding figure for the poorest 5%. By any standards, this disparity is staggering, and especially so when we remember that we are talking about incomes that have been corrected for purchasing power parity. So this number is definitely a very big number, and the disparity is very staggering. And we are talking about incomes which have been corrected for PPP, so we can't even talk about the measurement errors that we were discussing in the last class. So definitely this is a big number. The fact that overall distribution has remained stationary does not mean that there has been little movement of countries within the world distribution. So the distribution staying constant doesn't mean that there has been no movement within the world distribution. There definitely has been. Of particular interest in the 1980s is the rise of East Asian economies and the languishing other economies such as Sub-Saharan Africa and Latin America. So definitely there has been growth miracles and growth disasters. That just saying that the level of growth miracles and the level of growth disasters have somehow nullified each other such that the overall distribution has stayed relatively constant. Such experiences can change the economic composition of the world in the space of a few decades. Nonetheless, a single explanation for this diversity remains elusive. Third, the observation that several countries have changed relative positions suggests that there are no ultimate traps to development. As said before, that we are not saying that countries which are poverty stricken will stay so in the long run as well. We have seen examples of miracles such as East Asian economies, so it is possible. At the same time, a history of wealth does not seem to partly foretell future developments. The mobility of countries appears to be highest somewhere in the middle of wealth distribution, as we just witnessed in the mobility matrix, whereas a history of underdevelopment or extreme poverty appears to put countries at a disadvantage. So we are basically channeling both the features of development by saying that it is possible that a history of underdevelopment will put countries at a disadvantage. But having said that, you do see a small percentage. So we saw that 12% in the mobility matrix as well. 12% of countries having index 1 by 4 in 1962 moved to 1 by 2 and 1 in 1984. So there will be some percentage of these economies which will come out of the poverty trap, but definitely a history of underdevelopment will put countries at disadvantage vis-a-vis countries which are not poverty stricken or which do not have history of utter poverty. Last point, the history matters in this way is an observation that requires a careful explanation. Poor countries do seem to have some advantages. They can use relatively free of charge technologies that are developed by their richer counterparts. Scarce capital in these countries should display a higher rate of profit because of the law of diminishing returns. They can learn from mistakes that their predecessors have made. In this way, differences across countries should iron themselves out over the long run. Thus, the observation that history matters in maintaining persistent differences needs more of a justification than might be allowed at a first glance. So that just sort of summarizes the whole point of view that definitely, as the growth model suggests, that poor countries will have some advantages. They have higher marginal returns to capital, and hence they can also learn from their predecessors and from their mistakes. But everything works differently for every country, and although there are certain advantages, there are certain disadvantages as well for these economies, and how do they manage the two is what will guide their future in the long run. Right, so with that we end this section. Let's look at what's there in the next section. All right. I actually wanted to show a video, but maybe we can wait for a video and get rid of this section as well. And then if we have time, we can watch the video in the next class when we meet again at 11:45. So let's first complete this section, and then we can watch the video on this section. So there is a video on growth miracles and growth disasters, which I felt would be nice for you to see, to understand that there has been different economies who have fared differently in the world ranking. But let's wait for that. Okay, so income distribution in developing countries. Now, so in the last section, we talked about how there is disparity, there are inequalities across different countries or within the world economy. So some countries have risen, some countries have fallen. But it is also important to understand how this income that we are talking about, the average income of a particular economy, how this is distributed within the economy. So this section basically talks about income distribution within these countries. So it just doesn't compare, it is not just a comparison between countries, but it is a comparison within the countries. So it is very common to see enormous wealth coexisting with great poverty, and it is more than evident on the streets of Mumbai, Manila, Mexico. You will see that at the same time you have the high-rise buildings, you have great infrastructure, but at the same time you will see poor hygiene, slum areas living right across the streets of these high-rise buildings. So you do see a lot of inequality existing within these economies as well. All right, so there is this plot here that sort of is the background of this entire section, which is let me just show you that. So this figure, which I'll just show you, it summarizes recent information on inequality for selected countries, spanning the range between poorest and richest. So the figure records the income share of the poorest 40% of the population as well as the income share of the richest 20% of the population. So we are talking about the income share of the poorest 40% of the population as well as the income share of the richest 20% of the population. And we are talking about this share within the country. So suppose we take India, and I'll just explain this with the figure as well. But suppose we take India, then within India, what is the income share of, so suppose India had GDP level X. Out of this GDP level X, what is the share of 40% of poorest 40% and what is the share of the richest 20%? So we are not talking about, so just remember that in this section we are not talking about country across country comparison. We are talking about how within a country there is inequality and how this inequality is how this inequality increases as you move from a low income category to a high income category. Okay, so let's simultaneously, I think, also look at the figure so it becomes clearer. So this is the figure that we are talking about. You will notice some points here and you will notice some squares here. So these squares represent the richest 20%, as here the legend also describes, and the dots here represent the poorest 40%, the income share of the poorest 40% and the income share of the richest 20%. Now you will, so basically what's happening here is, so suppose on the x-axis you have per capita income and here you have the income share of the poorest 40% and the richest 20%. So suppose you pick one country, so you will basically have 2 points for each country. One country, suppose, which had 500 per capita income. For this country, what is the share of the poorest 40% and what is the share of the richest 20%? Similarly, for country which had per capita income to be equal to 1200, what is the share of poorest 40%, what is the share of the richest 20%? So what you have done here is you have plotted 2 points for each country. 1 point represents the income share of the poorest 40% and 1 point represents the income share of the richest 20%. Doing here is you are taking some countries, आपने कुछ countries ली हैं और इन countries की absolute level of income जो है वो अलग अलग है. So they have per capita income which is different from each other. So suppose you have India, you have Malaysia, you have Singapore, you have Pakistan, you have different countries. आपने हर country को यहाँ पे differentiate करा है with respect to differences in their per capita income. And then for each country you have plotted 2 points. For each country, what is the income share of the 40% poorest people? Poorest 40% people का क्या कितना income share है वो यहाँ पे आप represent कर रहे हो with this dot. In the same country, what is the share of the richest 20% people? You are representing that with this square here. So country which had a per capita income to be equal to 500, this dot represents the share of poorest 40%. This dot represents the share of richest 20%, right? Similarly, country which had 1200 as per capita income, this is country X, this is country Y. So these different squares and these different dots represent points for different countries, but each country has 2 points in this graph, right? So country with per capita income 1200, richest poorest 40% का share ये है, and share is calculated by the y-axis. So this is close to 16% here, this small dot. This I think is close to 45%. Similarly, this is between 15 and 25. So let's say maybe 20, and again this is 47. So these are the shares on the y-axis and per capita income on the x-axis. And then respectively for each per capita income you have 2 points. Okay, so this is the figure. Let's move back to the text. So I hope you just have to keep this figure in your head for a while. All right. Now by simple eyeballing the data, you can see that the poorest 40% of the population earn on average around 15%, perhaps less of overall income, whereas the richest 20% earn around half of total income. You will notice, which is quite clear, you will notice that these points here, none of these points are moving above 25%. किसी भी country के लिए ये जो poorest 40% वाला पॉइंट है, ये किसी भी कंट्री का 25 से ऊपर नहीं है, राइट? और रिचेस्ट का जब आप देखोगे तो एवरी मोस्ट majority of the economies have their points above 0.45. So एंड ये जो लाइन आ रहा है, अगर आप इसका एवरेज निकालो, देन दिस कम्स आउट टू बी क्लोज टू 15%. इट्स लेस देन, कुछ कंट्रीज का लेस देन 15 है, सम ऑफ देम आर बिटवीन 15 and 25. So the average comes out to be 15%, whereas this comes out to be more than the half of the total income. So by simple eyeballing, you can notice that the poorest 40% of the population earn on average 15% or perhaps less than that, whereas the richest 20% earn around half of the total income. Even though there is a plenty of variation around these averages, there is large discrepancy. Now, remember that these inequalities affect the poorest people in each country. We must compound this intra-country inequality with inter-country differences. This is important. So, we must compound this compound this intra-country inequality with inter-country differences that we have already discussed. We just discussed the inter-country differences in the last section, where we talked about how different countries are different from each other. But now we are talking about, so basically अगर आप किसी poor country के बारे में बात करो, तो आप इस disparity को दो stages में compound कर रहे हो. एक, that this country is a poor country, so this is already in a worse off situation. Compare this with another country Y, which is rich, right? Now you are talking about the poorest of the poor country. So you have 40% people जो इस poor country में सबसे ज़्यादा poor है. तो ये जो 40% लोग हैं, their disparity is compounded first because of their within country experience, that within the country X, which is a poor country, they are the poorest. They are the 40% people जो 40% poorest people. And then if you compare this with the world economy, then this country is also poor. So this set of people are basically, their poverty is compounded. They are poor, the poor are twice cursed, once for living in countries that are poor on average, and then again for being on the receiving end of high levels of inequality in those countries, right? So that's again important to note here in this graph. Figure 2.6 also plots tentative trends in these shares as we move from poor to rich countries. Now, although we are talking about within country shares, but you also see a trend here that how does the share change when you move from a low income category to a high income category? How does this share change? This figure also shows tentative trends in the sense that as you move from low per capita income to high per capita income, what is the change in the shares that you see here? Basically, inequality किस चीज से represent होएगी? अगर आप एक particular country का poorest 40% वाला point richest 20% से compare करो, और आप ये देखो कि ये कितना different है, ये कितना distant है एक दूसरे से, that will tell you the level of inequality in this particular country, and you can do this for each country. ये हर country के लिए आप कर सकते हो. So basically, if you compare countries with, now this is an inter-country comparison that we are making right now. हम बोल रहे हैं कि जैसे country low income से high income की तरफ move करती है, what is the changes in these differences that you see between the shares of the poorest and the richest, right? And you notice कि जो ये trend line यहाँ पे बना है, what does this trend line depict? That at the lower levels of income, at the two ends, lower level of income and higher level of income, the distance seems to be lesser. If the distance is lesser, it indicates that inequality is lesser. अगर ये distance कम है, इसका क्या मतलब है कि poorest 40% का income share और richest 20% के income share में कम difference है, which represents lesser inequality. Whereas somewhere in the between, somewhere in the middle, you see that this distance is very large. which are the middle income countries. So these middle income countries जो ये बीच में lie कर रही हैं, they seem to have a larger inequality as compared to the two extremes. आप यहाँ पे क्या ट्रेंड देख रहे हो for the poorest 40%, that the share decreases and it reaches its minimum point somewhere here and then it increases. For the richest, the share increases, the share in the income increases and then it starts falling. तो जैसे जैसे इनकम बढ़ती जाती है, आप देख रहे हो कि पहले इनइक्वालिटी इंक्रीज हो रही है और फिर इनइक्वालिटी डिक्रीज हो रही है. सो इफ आई हैड टू प्लॉट अ कर्व between if I had to plot a curve between per capita income and inequality, then what can I say? एक ब्रॉड ग्राफ जो मैं बना सकती हूँ वो मैं बोल सकती हूँ कि पहले इनइक्वालिटी इंक्रीज हो रही है एंड देन इनइक्वालिटी इज डिक्रीजिंग. एज द इनकम इंक्रीजेस, फर्स्ट इनइक्वालिटी इंक्रीजेस एंड देन इनइक्वालिटी डिक्रीजेस, राइट? This is also called, it is a very famous theory in development economics, which is called as the inverted U hypothesis of Kuznets. It is called as the Kuznets curve. Kuznets, Simon Kuznets said that जब कोई भी इकोनॉमी ग्रो करती है तो वो इकोनॉमी initial stages of its development will bring about some level of inequality. So when we talk about this debate of absolute levels of income and distribution of income, then we say that one of the theories, which is by Kuznets, and it's a very famous theory, profound theory, which says that जैसे ही income बढ़नी start होती है, inequality evidently उसके साथ increase होगी. But as income crosses its benchmark and it increases further, then the inequality will start decreasing. So you have to wait for any economy to grow to an extent that inequality starts decreasing. But initially कोई भी economy जब grow कर रही होती है तो inequality उस economy में बढ़ेगी, लेकिन eventually जैसे जैसे income increase होती जाएगी, that inequality will slowly start diminishing. That is one theory proposed by Kuznets. Whether it is true or not is a big debate, is a big question. Empirically, किन countries, कौन सी country कौन सी stage पे है, whether countries are at this stage or countries are at this stage, that is again a macroeconomic question, and a lot of researchers would be interested in knowing कि कौन सी country कहाँ पर है, whether this Kuznets curve is actually empirically makes sense or not, right? So, but keep in mind that although this is a theory, यहाँ पे we are only trying to approximate this with a very rough explanation, because when we talk about the Kuznets curve, जब हम यहाँ पे level of income लेते हैं तो वो सिर्फ एक इकोनॉमी का लेते हैं. यहाँ पे हम एक इकोनॉमी के लेवल ऑफ इनकम की बात नहीं कर रहे हैं. यहाँ पे हम बोल रहे हैं कि एक लो इनकम इकोनॉमी को अगर मैं एक हाई इनकम इकोनॉमी से कंपेयर करूं तो आई सी दिस ट्रेंड. But the Kuznets theory is not talking about inter-country changes in income. It talks about the intra-country change in income. It talks about how when income increases within the country, inequality tends to increase and then further falls. But we can make this rough approximation of this Kuznets theory in this curve as well, that as economies move from low income to high income, you see that the inequality initially tends to increase and then it tends to fall. All right. Um, yeah, so this paragraph just talks about the same thing. Then the two trends together suggest in Kuznets curve. Yeah, so this point has to be kept in mind that for now, nothing is really being said about how inequality in a single country changes over time. What we have here is a snapshot running over different countries. We are not talking about how this inequality which would change within an economy. We are just saying that inter-country changes in income are leading to the same kind of results that we would expect to happen for one specific country. Okay, then it just tells you about how this plot has what exact countries do we have on these plot in the three categories. So you have South Asian countries, India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, African countries, which are and few of the poorer Latin American countries in the first stretch of this diagram. So in the first stretch, 0 to 3000, which we'll further differentiate here. So we have basically categorized countries into three groups. One is 0 to 3000 PPP, then 3000 to 9000 PPP, and then 9000 plus PPP. And we have placed different countries in these different categories. So this tells you just the distribution of the countries. So you have Indian, Latin American countries, and African countries in the first stretch. Then this middle income countries are Latin American, richer Latin American nations. So Peru, Brazil, Colombia, Chile, Mexico, Thailand, Malaysia, and above the 9000 mark, you have Portugal, Mauritius, and these different countries. So we have basically classified countries into three categories: 0 to 3000, 3000 to 9000, and 9000 plus. Remember, we are talking about 1993. This is the data for 1993 PPP. 3000, you stop and you take all the countries below 3000 PPP and categorize them as low income countries. Then you stop at 9000, and then with between 3000 and 9000, you categorize countries and you call them as middle income countries. And then 9000 plus are the countries which are the high income countries. You have three columns here in the table. First is the per capita income. You will notice that per capita income is increasing, which is obvious since you have categorized them in an ascending order. Then you have the share of the poorest 40% here and the share of the richest 20. This is basically the data that has been plotted here in the chart here. So this is just the data of the countries here. And now you will notice the similar kind of trend here. So at very low levels of income, average levels of living are very low, and so it is very difficult to squeeze the income share of the poorest 40% below a certain minimum. So you see that there is a um, certain share of notice that these are in percentages, and here you have it in the fraction. So just don't get confused between 0.515 and 18 or 15 here. They've just multiplied these shares with 100 and converted them into percentages, right? So you'd see that there is some level of some, I mean, it's some subsistence share for the poorest 40%, even in the low income categories, because it is difficult uh, to drop people below a certain level of income. So you do see that for these countries, for the low income countries, you see the share of the poorest people between 11 to 21 percentage points. The range is 11 to 21, 22 actually. Whereas the rich, the share of the richest 20% is between 39 and 59. So you see that the different countries have different share of poorest and the richest population. And specifically for India, if you want to look at, then you notice that share of the 40% poorest people is 21%, and richest is 41%. So it's double of what the poorest people have. Then so the difference is relatively lesser if you look at the Indian case. Whereas if you compare other countries like Uganda, you will see that the share for the poorest is 17, where richest is 48, which is greater than what the Indian figures represent. And I think this one has the highest difference. You notice that uh, 59% of the share goes to the richest 20% people, and 11% goes to the poorest 40% people. Um, yeah. So but the broad idea is that you do notice when you move from this category to this category, and further when you move from this category to the next category. So as you move from low income category to middle income and then to rich income category, high income category, you notice that the share of the richest people tends to be the highest in this zone. Just simple eyeballing of the data will tell you that okay, so the richest 20% people here have about 41, 48, 59. Average would be close to 43, 44%. Here as well, you see that the share of the richest 20% is more evenly distributed. You will see greater inequalities even in the amongst these countries, that some has 39% while the others have 59 as well. You have a 59 percentage share of richest 20% people here, whereas the lowest is 39. Where rich, if you look at the high income countries, then the share of the richest 20% people is more or less the same, with slight differences, say about 40, 41, 42%. Whereas in the middle income group, you will see that there is firstly greater inequality and also greater absolute levels of the share of the income share. So you see that 59, 50 is the minimum and 60 is the maximum. Sorry, 65 is the maximum. So you do see greater absolute numbers as well as greater inequalities here in the share of the richest people in the middle income countries relative to the poorer and the high income. High income category looks more evenly distributed because they almost have 40%, 42% of the share going to the richest people. Here again, you see greater inequalities. Some have 59%, whereas South Sri Lanka has 39%. But the inequality is still high, but the absolute numbers are lesser. Whereas in the middle income, you see both to be higher. The inequality is also higher, and the absolute numbers are also high. If you look at the poorest share, then again you will notice that definitely this one has high numbers, but again greater inequalities. You will see that the least is 11 and the highest is 22. So definitely inequalities here. You will notice that on an average, the share of the poorest 40% tends to fall in the middle income countries. So the trend that we saw, which is that the share of the lowest 40%, poorest 40% people tends to first decrease and then increase, is what we are witnessing here. If you look at these countries also, that poorest 40% people tends to fall and then it tends to increase. Similarly, the richest, the trend was that it tends to increase and then it tends to fall, which is what you see here as well, that it tends to increase as you move from the low income group to the high income group. It increases and then it starts to fall. And then if you compare the inequalities here, you will find that it's fairly lesser as compared to the previous groups. You will find the inequalities to be the maximum here. So 8% lowest 40% and 63% goes to the richest. So the inequalities are maximum in this category, whereas it would be lesser in these two categories, as we demonstrated in the chart as well. But you will notice that this one looks more evenly spread out as compared to the low income groups, because you will notice that even the share of the poorest 40% tends to be moving around 20%. So some have 18, 19 or 20. Only one has, that's also not an outlier, it's close to 20. So they are relatively in the same bandwidth. They have less inequalities even across countries. So some points from the table. For countries, the income share of the rich, although high, is nowhere close to the extraordinarily high ratios observed in the middle income countries. So the share of the richest 20% people is definitely higher in the middle income countries as compared to the rich income countries. Now this indicates another possibility, which is that as economic growth proceeds, it initially benefits the richest groups in the society more than proportionately. it benefits the richest groups in the society more than proportionately, and that's evident from the table. Why? Because you notice that as you proceed from low income to middle income to high income, the share of the richest tends to increase at a greater pace as compared to the lowest categories. So the share increases rapidly. So the reason why you see a U-shaped curve when you talk about inequality and income, you see this U-shaped curve, and the reason why you see this U-shaped curve is that the प्रोसीड्स ऑफ द इकोनॉमिक ग्रोथ, जो भी इकोनॉमी ग्रो कर रही है उसका जो बेनिफिट है वो सबसे ज्यादा रिचेस्ट लोगों को होता है. एंड बिकॉज रिचेस्ट पीपल आर ऑब्जर्विंग greater benefits, the lowest at the same time do not observe the benefits. They get even more marginalized, and hence the difference increases between the rich and the poor initially. But as you grow at higher levels of per capita income, economic growth tends to be distributed more equally. The poorest quintiles now gain in income share. So they are just trying to focus on the path of economic growth, that as there is an increase in income, the richest tends to get the maximum benefit in the short run. And then eventually, as income progresses even further, the lowest also tends to rise. But having said that, it is worth noting that there is no inevitability about this process. There is no, hard and fast rule for this process that this will surely happen. This Kuznets curve doesn't hold true for all countries. It is not. It is not something that is a fact. It is just a theory. So this may or may not hold true. So there is no inevitability about this process. Countries that pursue policies of broad-based access to infrastructure and resources such as health and education will find that economic growth is distributed relatively equally among the various groups in society, whereas countries which will neglect this feature will have greater inequalities. So indeed, things are more complicated than just this, because definitely there are other things at action as well rather than just income, as we have been talking about this in the previous lectures as well, that it is not just a focus on rising income. With the rising income, what is happening to these kind of policies such as health and education? Is it being distributed equally amongst different groups in the society? If yes, then we can expect the growth or the increase in income to get redistributed more equally amongst different sections of the society. So we have to take into consideration these aspects as well when we talk about equality of income or distribution of income, which brings us to the next topic of discussion, which is the human development. That with the increasing income, it is also important to note that whether with the increasing income there has been focus on other social aspects of the economy or not. If the other social factors are being looked at more carefully along with the increasing income, then we can expect the inequalities to decrease. We can expect the income to get distributed more equally amongst different sections of the society. Right. So the combination of low per capita income and unequal distribution of them means that in large parts of the developing world, people might lack access to basic health services such as health, sanitation, education, and so on. Collection of all these basic indicators brings us to a new concept that has been termed as human development, which is what we will turn to next. All right. I think what I will want to do right now is to probably complete the first subsection of this section and then leave the index for the next class. All right, so let's just quickly see how far we can go with this. I would at least want to complete 2.4.1 here. So human development is the next issue that we would want to bring to light here, which is that although income is distributed unequally within countries, and especially so in developing countries, we also notice a fair degree of variation um, in terms of human development. And it is important to simultaneously also bring into picture the variations or inequality in terms of human development alongside the inequalities in income. So the variation suggests that excessive reliance on GNP per capita as a reliable indicator of overall development might be dangerous. A relatively prosperous country may also fare poorly on some of the common indicators of development, such as literacy, drinking water, access to drinking water, low rates of infant mortality, etc. So it's possible that you might have a country with a higher level of income, but at the same time that country might not fare well in terms of these other indicators. So it's important to have a more holistic idea of development by looking at these aspects as well. So they've given an example here of two countries. Um, the income and income distribution have been extracted from the previous tables and they have been reproduced here. And if you look here, then you will notice that Guatemala had a higher income as compared to Sri Lanka. So you will notice that 29903350, definitely Guatemala has a higher income as compared to Sri Lanka. But in terms of the inequalities, you see that this one has greater inequality as compared to Sri Lanka. You notice that the share, this will fall under the middle income category if I'm not wrong, and this is the low income category country. So you notice that the level of inequality is higher. But here in this section, we also focus on the social indicators of these two countries. Now look at some of the human development indicators for these countries, and this is the table which represents the differences. Now you notice that despite having a higher income and despite having a lower income, Sri Lanka fares well in terms of life expectancy. Sri Lanka has a higher life expectancy. Sri Lanka has a lesser infant mortality rate, 18 compared to 48. Access to safe water, more or less same, 60 and 62%. Adult literacy is way higher in a country where the income is less. So these two countries are definitely, one is one is a low income country and one is a middle income country. But in terms of these social indicators, you see that the low income country tends to perform better than the middle income country, and hence the logic behind focusing on other aspects of development stands true in such comparisons, where you see that um, much of the difference stems from differences in IMR, infant mortality rate, which is, infant mortality rate is basically the number of children below 1 year of age who die before 1 year of age. So number of children per 1,000 live births who die before the age of 1 is the infant mortality rate. And you notice that there are differences in these two countries. Despite a country being a middle income country, you see that it lags behind a low income country in terms of social indicators. And possibly the reason for this is inequality. So it is hard to escape the conclusion that the highly unequal distribution of income in Guatemala is responsible, at least in part, for these differences in some natural yardsticks of development. So this high level of inequality here that you witness is possibly responsible for the kind of variations we see on the indicators of human development. However, that may not be the whole story. Even a relatively equal distribution of income may not be enough. So we are not saying that uh, this is sort of a sufficient condition. We are not saying that inequality or maintaining equality in a society is a sufficient condition for human development indicators to perform well. So it's still possible that you have equal distribution of income and still your indicators aren't performing well. But we definitely can make some relationship between equality of income and these indicators. But this doesn't suffice to call inequality as a sufficient condition for the development indicators. For instance, so they are also giving an example for the same, that however stunning the efforts of Sri Lanka are, so Sri Lanka, although despite being in a low income category, it does well uh, in terms of its human development indicators. Countries such as Hong Kong do much better simply because they have larger access to resources and because they have higher level of income. So we're not saying that just focusing on equality will tend to solve the problem for human development. Uh, Countries such as Hong Kong, they will definitely do better because they are more they have more resources to play with, and they fall in a better income category. But these are just some examples for us to sort of make sort of keep in mind that this process firstly is not so easy to crack. You can't really rely on one theory or one trajectory or one explanation for the kind of differences we see in different economies. So we are, by bringing up such examples, we are just trying to sort of highlight the complex nature of this process. Yeah, again, another example, that Pakistan, which has a per capita income of 2170, which is closer to what Sri Lanka has. Sri Lanka still has a higher per capita income, but in terms of the social indicators, you will notice that the um, that Pakistan does. I mean, it is not performing well relative to Sri Lanka in terms of human development indicators, despite having similar level of inequality. So the poorest 40% earns 21%, which is what Sri Lanka also has, 22%. So the GDP level, the per capita level, and the shares are almost same as Sri Lanka, but in terms of the social indicators, the things look very different. They have life expectancy of 62, infant mortality rate of 91, which is a huge number, while Sri Lanka has just 18 per thousand people. Literacy rate is only 36% in 1992, which is again significantly lesser than that of Sri Lanka. So clearly there are other things that has to be taken into consideration, that has to be taken into purview when we try and evaluate development of these different economies. So clearly government policies such as those concerning education, health, and demand for such policies, and institutions that we've already talked about, geography of different nations, economic history of different nations, do play an important role in defining where these economies are. Right. And then there is an index of human development that has been proposed by the UNDP to compare different economies on these aspects. So, human development takes into consideration income, education, and health. These are the three broad categories that you have in the calculation of Human Development Index, which is also abbreviated as HDI. So, there's a lot that has been talked about HDI, and these days people not only compare countries based on their income levels, but actually based on their HDI to get a more holistic idea of where they stand. I think we'll stop here today, but before stopping, I would want you to growth miracles and growth disasters.
Are poor countries catching up to rich countries, or are they falling further behind? Said another way, is there divergence or convergence between standards of living in different countries over time? Let's start with what economic historian Deirdre McCloskey calls the great fact about the modern world. If you graph global economic output over the past 2,000 years, you'll see this, what we've referred to earlier as the hockey stick of human prosperity. Now let's look at that same data, not at a global level, but by region. Since the Industrial Revolution, the growth paths taken by different regions have diverged dramatically. The US and Western Europe experienced the hockey stick path of growth, while other regions have stagnated. This was described as divergence big time in a famous economics paper. But that's not the whole story either. Let's dive into this data even further, down to the country level. Here's Argentina in 1950. It's a relatively successful economy, with a standard of living similar to many Western European economies. Now here's Japan. At the time, they're quite poor, with a standard of living similar to Mexico. But let's move forward in time. Japan begins growing at an astonishing pace, doubling their living standards about every 8 years. Argentina, on the other hand, experienced periods of negative growth. They managed to double their living standard just once in 65 years. By 2015, Japan, it's one of the most prosperous countries on earth. Argentina, on the other hand, it's stagnated. It went from double the standard of living in Japan in 1950 to Japan being twice as prosperous as Argentina today. Japan is a growth miracle, with a standard of living over 10 times higher now than in 1950. Other growth miracles have occurred in South Korea and China. In India today, looks like it may have started down the hockey stick path of prosperity. So the good news is that with the right factors in place, a poor country, it can not only grow, but it can grow quickly and catch up to developed countries. What took the United States 200 years of steady growth can be achieved in other countries by rapid growth in about 40 years. Catch-up can happen in a generation or two. The bad news is that it's not guaranteed. Some countries like Argentina, they grow well for a time and then they stall. Even worse are countries such as Niger or Chad, which have never experienced significant growth. They're the worst kind of growth disasters, extreme poverty with very little growth at all. And it's important to remember that these are more than just numbers. A growth miracle means not just more goods and services, but better health and greater happiness for millions of people. See our earlier video showing how GDP per capita is a good summary measure of a country's standard of living. On the other hand, a growth disaster, that means the opposite. People are less prosperous and they live shorter and less happy lives. So growth miracles and growth disasters, they're possible. But what are the causes? What are the factors that lead to growth, prosperity, health, and better lives? That's the topic we're going to turn to next.
Right. So you saw in this video that how different, so that's precisely what we've been discussing since the morning, that there could be cases where you see that a country is poor in a specific year, and in the forthcoming decades it turns out to be the greatest economy in the world scenario, whereas countries who are doing well right now may not proceed to maintain that position in the forthcoming decades. So it's a very unpredictable kind of a scenario where we have some hope, because we believe that there have been cases where poor countries have turned out to be the major economies of the world economy, whereas there have also been cases where well-performing countries have fallen to be in the lower income category now. And there you also see some examples here where some countries over a period of time haven't shown any improvement. They've just seen a constant trajectory. So in the middle of this video, it shows how different countries have just observed a constant growth, and they haven't really experienced that phase of boom which other countries have. So trying to dissect the reasons behind why Japan has fared so well, and why Argentina couldn't do well after a certain point of time, why other Latin American countries who were performing well till 1980s declined after 1980s, and why East Asian countries started rising after 1980s and 1990s. What are the reasons behind it is the entire study of development economics. So we do have some answers, but there are still some questions which are pertinent, such as what we have been trying to sort of explore and raise through the course. We've been talking about inequality and how even inequality sort of corroborates with development, as we just saw the example of Sri Lanka, Pakistan, and Guatemala, how they are different in terms of income, but their social indicators are also starkly different. So, these are some questions that you would have as you go on and read this chapter.